Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll just give it one more minute and then we'll get started, waiting for a few more people to join.
Hello? Alicia, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you okay, Mohini.
Okay, great. Can we start the recording, please?
Already started.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohini, and I work with Save the Children. And this month's webinar, the fresh webinar, is on substance abuse prevention through schools in low resource countries, looking at what we know and need to know. And it commemorates the International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. We'll start off by handing over to Doug McCall from ISHN, who will be the moderator for today's webinar.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to this session on substance in low resource countries. I'm pleased to welcome a series of speakers. I'm going to introduce them very quickly in the order that they're presenting, and then we'll move on to their presentations, come back to discussion and questions about those presentations, and then move to looking at there's 2 slides of statements that have been derived from a research and resources review that we've just completed. And if we have time, we'll start to discuss some of those points. So without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Wadih Maalouf from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Wadih is the program coordinator with the UNODC. We have also Dr. Aala El-Khani, who will be discussing parenting programs. She is a humanitarian psychologist and develops innovative ways to reach families. Isidore Obot, who was scheduled to be with us today, is not able to. He's had a death in the family, so he's not able to be at the session. But I will comment briefly on his topic, which was to look at tobacco advertising and implications for youth in low-resource countries. Hanna Heikklia will be also from the UNODC. Will be reporting on their work with rural communities, and that's very important in this context for sure. And then we also have people from both from a group that was responsible for writing the most recent guide for the education sector, published jointly by UNODC and UNESCO and WHO. I see on the line Yongfen Liu from UNESCO, and we have resource people from that group as well as others who we've invited. Brian Flay, who from Oregon State University, Sky Siu, who is the executive director of the Kelly Youth Support Group, and I'm also expecting Murtaza Mahid, who is the international coordinator for Youth Rise. I'm also expecting, I haven't seen his name yet, Leanne Solis from Plan International. Leanne's organization is sponsoring these reviews and these statements, and is pleased to be part of this. Very pleased with it. We've written to about 25 or 30 authors of various reports, and so we're very pleased to be engaging with this excellent leadership that in regards to substance abuse prevention. So looking forward to it. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Wadih and look forward to his remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me well. Thank you very much, Doug, for this introduction, and I'm very happy to join this great panel and great participants, colleagues, and friends. I'm just going to present under this topic more than on the theoretical background, practical information based on UNODC's global experience in a global program on prevention that I've been coordinating since early 2010. Can we move to the next slide, please? So the program that UNODC is undertaking as our field of work entails our priority country of obligation when it comes to technical capacity building are low and middle income country, but particularly with a particular focus on low resource countries. So these are some field notes that have been generated through the operation of this program that I will present in more details as the slides move forward. The main problem that we face when we are engaged in low resource countries particularly, but not only in low resource country, is given that our main point of entry are policymakers at the ministerial level, is the definition of prevention being still very loosely understood or misunderstood as well. In most countries where we're operating, prevention is confused with, if not replaced by, awareness raising campaigns, mostly on the dangers of drugs. So it's when prevention of drugs is considered, the focus is on the drug element of the response, rather than more broader angle. And then the moral ethical value of programs that focuses on promoting more, the immorality of using drugs and the consequences from a moral perspective and less from a health perspective as well, is one of the angles that have been tackled through available programs in low resource countries. And then some programs are drug focused. They focus on a specific substance. Many times we face programs that have one-time event. Particularly given this occasion, many times these events happen during the celebration of the International Day Against Drugs on June 26th, but that would be the event where a box is ticked that prevention activities have been done. Few hours, frequent interval messages, and the focus most of the time are on the adolescent and young adult population. Can you move to the next slide, please? So basically, most policymakers in these countries are more unsure, puzzled, confused, not only in terms of programming, but in terms of reporting, in terms of their prevention activity, what exactly prevention has attained, what prevention activity they've undertaken, what is the impact of their activities. It's still a loose ball. Next slide, please. So basically, this is where the main concept of the global program of prevention of UNODC is acting on. It is mainly on changing and promoting a culture of evidence-based prevention, changing that specific culture in the countries where we're. One is a top-down approach, top in the sense of we work with policymakers, making them change their perception of what prevention is, hoping that by doing so, avail more opportunities for service providers at the bottom level to be able to have experiences with evidence-based prevention to the people that they need to reach out with. And it's complemented by a bottom-up approach where we work with service providers, adapting and piloting evidence-based approaches, testing them in their own countries, documenting their effectiveness, and as such, providing that documentation of effectiveness to policymakers at the top level, for them also to feel the sense that this is not just theory. This can be put in practice, it's feasible, it can make a change in your country, in their countries, and as such, these complementary approaches could eventually and hopefully change their culture of prevention. Next slide, please. So from top-down approach, as I said, it's an approach where we engage directly with policymakers to change their understanding of what prevention is, the main definition of prevention. When we say drug prevention, what do we mean by it? What etiology the response should be based on? So are you addressing the substance, or are you addressing the vulnerabilities that lead to initiation of substance use? And what are the effective elements of the prevention response that make the prevention response effective as per the science, and not as per just what we believe. And then we describe what works, what does not work, at what developmental age, and so on and so forth, by relying on a specific tool called the International Standards on Drug Use Prevention that I will briefly go over through its main content. But that engagement is done through a structured 3-day seminar where we work with the policymakers going step by step in terms of the etiology and the science of prevention, moving on a developmental age by developmental age and social setting by social setting, a review of what programs have documented by science works and what are the elements of it that work and don't work. I'll have a slide on it that will describe in more details what is the menu of items we go through. And yes, on this slide you will see the main topic and the concept of there's a lack of, it's not necessarily an innate choice when substance use is being initiated. There are sets of vulnerabilities that operate on the individual level, on the micro level around the kids, on the families, the schools, the surrounding, the immediate surrounding around them, and the macro environment in the communities where they live. And all of these items generate a set of vulnerabilities, and in some instances, of course, preventive factors that we want to promote, protective factor that we want to promote. And as such, putting the person at the vulnerability crossroad of substance use being one of the outcomes and symptoms that are initiated, but also many other sort of social outcomes are linked to the same set of vulnerabilities. Can we move to the next slide? Essentially, in one slide, this summarizes the entire spectrum of the international standards when it comes to the response, opening up the views of the policymakers that prevention starts from prenatal ages up to adulthood. There are different developmental stages of growth, and each one has its own milestones when it comes to growth and development, and they need a different type of support at each level of growth. And different social institutions can intervene within these different age groups. And there are specific programs where have been very well documented that these programs can have an impact on substance use. These programs not necessarily tackling substance use per se, but more the vulnerability around that developmental age, and as such helping the kids grow in a healthy and to grow healthy beyond just investing in program that focuses on the substance, but you're focusing on the person, and as such gaining an impact that goes beyond just preventing substance use, outcomes being also linked to violence prevention, crime prevention, improving academic achievement, improving academic performance, mental and physical health being improved. And you see the sets of programs described here as families of programs, really, under which there are lots of, let's say, brands of manualized programs that can be put in place. And then these programs can either be on a universal basis, as you see in the green color, on a selective basis, as you see in yellow, or an indicated level of prevention, as you see in red. And as such, the policymakers can read through these programs, check what age groups they have programs available, age groups where they have programs unavailable, what different social settings. And at the same time, the same menu, which is the international standards, goes into the details of what characteristics of these programs per the science identified these programs to be effective. And then there's a science of what programs have been identified to be ineffective, and as such can contrast and compare their programs on a national basis to what the international standards are proposing in order to improve their prevention system. And this is the first step that we undertake in order to change that culture of prevention from the top-down level. And my colleague Hanna, as well as Joanna, have been just in the revision of these standards to further improve the set of menu that is indicated. And this probably Hanna in her presentation will go through it. Can we go to the next slide, please? And then we have a bottom-up approach. The bottom-up approach is where we go and adapt evidence-based prevention. So we currently are the main two programs where we have sets of evidence in terms of strong, because we want to reflect a change at the end of the, as I said, we're changing the culture there. So we have a limited window of time of engagement with these policymakers to show that change. In school, we're focusing on early school years, management technique, only skills programs. We're operating on these, but of course, with the window of time that we have, we're not documenting impact at the level of substance use, but more in terms of feasibility, practicality, and change at the mediating level of impact, because we have a 1-year window where we're working with these countries. But more interestingly, on the early adolescent age group, where we have a window of time of 1 year where we can check this impact in terms of substance use initiation, we focus mostly on life and social emotional skills development, in terms of life skills in schools, adaptation and piloting, as well as family skills. I'm using family skills under the perspective of the school-based program, because of the fact that family skills program are that the way we're implementing them is the families that are gathered to take benefit from these programs gather in the classroom of the school after school hours in order to also have the families in most of the times engaged with the school is an additional key ingredient to make prevention effective. So despite the fact that the teachers are not necessarily implicated in the family skills program, but classrooms within these schools are. So they are mostly also a recruitment ground for the family skills program, the schools. We're not promoting a specific program. We just look from a menu of evidence-based programs that are available globally. We pilot, we adapt these programs. We first of all engage with the Ministry of Education as the main counterpart, whether it's on the family skills or also on the life skills education in classrooms. Life skills education in classrooms, of course, are done most of the time by the teachers. So that's why it's evident we work with the Ministry of Education, and the family skills, for the reason I mentioned, we're using their classrooms as well. Most of the times from experience, the Ministry of Education is one of the hardest ministry to engage with, even though as UNODC we're engaged with several ministries when it comes to the drug control response. But even with the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Justice, sometimes it's easier to engage with them than the Ministry of Education, because of the fact the Ministry of Education has a very rigid curriculum in terms of an education curriculum that it's very hard sometimes to alter and change that specific vision. But so far we've been successful with a lot of early engagement. So as I said, we just adapt a program on a small scale in this country. It's a stepwise approach. We just don't go on a full scale like clinical trial in these countries. We have small pilots, quasi-experimental groups, few schools, 10 to 15 schools in cities that are selected by the Ministry of Education, where we test the feasibility of this program, and most of the time we have pre-test, post-test data to showcase that the programs can work, it's feasible, and we do test the changes that are noted at this quasi-experimental level. I unfortunately don't have the data time to present all the data, but we have published at least 6 peer-reviewed journals from articles in peer-reviewed journals from these pilots that we're doing in about 22 countries now, in Central America and the Caribbean, in Southeast Europe, in Central Asia and West Asia, as well as in East Africa, because indirectly promoting the culture of scientific research as well is being done. While we're doing these programs, of course, because we're working in low-resource countries, the teachers, especially for social emotional learning, need incentives for them to do these programs because of the difficulty, the economic challenges that they're facing. The big challenge that we have is that whenever we're doing these pilots, we are setting a precedent that the government needs to take over and proceed with this. So we're always careful in terms of how to, despite the fact that sometimes the project allow it from a financial perspective to avail a certain level of financial incentives to the teachers to proceed. However, we're concerned from a sustainability perspective if this sets a precedent that the government might not be able to pick up the bill at a later stage and to move to full scale up. So we try to change this scheme of incentives to more providing incentives to the school, for example. I give you an example for any classroom that is providing life skills education or family skills program. We try to provide some seed funds for refurbishing the classroom, the tables, providing like projectors, DVDs to see like some of the family skills programs that are there. From one side, it helps from a community development perspective of the school, and from the other, avoid like other incentive that might be impediments. Or as well, we provide certificates of training for the teacher that might at a later stage provide potential for the teacher to grow from an academic perspective or other perspectives as well. Recruitment to these programs is always a challenge. Even after we pass the threshold of the Ministry of Education accepting to implement programs in schools, many of these programs are being labeled because of a drug prevention perspective as an impediment for some of the families to engage their kids in them without understanding the nature of these programs, because in most of these countries they've never had programs like these before. So understanding that, for example, a life and social emotional skill program does not necessarily focus on, but rather focuses on everyday life challenges and stresses and how to overcome them, how to build a relationship, how to challenge the normative belief, how to build your own sense of refusal skills without jeopardizing your relationships, are all things that are new for them. And from a family skills perspective, I'm sure Aala will go into the more details, talking about and between parents and their kids, and education and better monitoring skills, and not necessarily drugs are new concepts for them. So the first wave, the first trial of these programs is always challenging, but as programs start to build momentum and the community understand what these programs are, the process becomes a lot smoother. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the culture of evaluation is something that we're also promoting, also from the same objective of promoting a cultural change within these countries, because prevention, as I said, many times is also when we talk about programs that are not in line with the standards. When we ask about how do you measure if these programs are successful or not, the focus is always on process level evaluation. Lots of people took this program, lots of people are happy with this program, lots of people said that they would like to see more of such programs, but nothing on the level of at least outcome evaluation or impact evaluation. So we try to, even with our quasi-experimental design, to document the impact of these programs. And in many cases, we have managed to find changes at the level of, for example, in life skills education in schools. We have, at least in 4 countries in Southeast Europe, we managed to have clinical trials of cases and controls, as well as in Brazil, where we documented a significant change in people that took these programs versus people who did not take such programs in the sense of prevalence of substance use within the same academic year, which is something, a breakthrough for many of these policymakers in such countries. Affinity post-evaluation is really high. Many countries, after they get a taste of such programs, they get a hook on it. And I don't think it's only the policymakers, but many times it's the teachers, the school principals, as well as the families that plays a significant role in advocating for a scale-up of such programs. However, scale-up remain a challenge, and as well as sustainability of such programs remain a challenge. We have programs that are open source in the open domain in life skills education, less so in the family skills programming. The resources needed for copyright, royalty fees, the feeling that such programs remain in a way with an umbilical cord linked to the developing institutions are valuable in the sense of the countries feeling that they still don't have programs that have their own national identity. So we're trying now more and more to move to open source programs. I'm sorry, I just noticed that there are some questions on the side. Mohini asked the stars regarding the mapping of the international standards. In a nutshell, the stars in the map that was there, even a one-star program has enough evidence that it had an impact on substance use initiation. However, an additional number of stars mean that the significance of the evidence is stronger. So the more number of stars, the more strength of evidence in the search program. But even a one-star program, as per the standards, have documented enough evidence of its work.
It's Doug here. We're gonna go through the presentations and come back to the questions in the postings.
Exactly. So I moved to final thoughts with this. It's a good segue to move to final thoughts. So despite the field challenges, the affinity in low resource countries is very high because they have no other competing programs, and they're feeling that these programs can actually do make a difference, despite the fact that there is a lot of investment in prevention, more than actually anticipated going in, but it's a wrong investment. So these programs have a certain level of, definitely a level of affinity. The political framework that is set currently with the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, particularly articulating a target on strengthening drug prevention and drug treatment, we might say as well, as a part of a sustainable development between 2015 and 2030, is an important movement forward. The political declaration of 2009 that we live in, the General Assembly special session reflection of prevention, and now with the introduction of the standards, particularly saying that when we say prevention, it should be in line with the international standards, is good political framework. Definitely not enough for countries to understand. We still need the direct engagement with these countries for them to understand what we mean and to help put the seeds of that culture in, as mentioned. The research culture is still poor. There's still, there's always that cultural clash in the sense of they're saying these programs have been piloted outside of our borders and might not be culturally relevant to ours. We still need to reflect more and more research from low resource countries, and we're trying to help in this. I encourage all the people that are on board that heard about this to further engage in these countries. Public domain programs are still poor, and this is an important thing that we need to put in perspective for low resource country to have more homegrown programs that are evidence informed, because this national ownership of a program is a key ingredient for sustainability and scale up, and this can be only achieved through public domain and open source programs. There are different needs and challenges in low resource countries as compared to the countries where evidence-based programs exist. There could be subpopulation, for instance, the refugees, the internally displaced, street children, out-of-school children. All of these sort of problematics, we still have a problem in terms of identifying specific programs to recommend as evidence-based, because of the fact that these evidence-based programs have been cultured in other countries that don't necessarily have such problems. From a feasibility perspective and based on experience, the feasibility is high and the culture is changing, and the work that we're doing is moving forward. And but this requires a continuous engagement with the government, at least at the early stages before dissociating. Is there a further slide? We move to the next one. Yeah. No, that I wanted to end on this note in terms of the future direction, to end on a relatively positive note.
Great, thank you very much, Wadih. Aala, can you take us into your presentation, please?
Good afternoon from Manchester. Thank you, Wadih, for that great overview. I'm really glad to join you all for this really important discussion, and I hope that my voice is clear enough. I work on collaborating the efforts of the UNODC and the University of Manchester on developing and evaluating family skills programs for families in low resource settings. As mentioned, I'm going to introduce the concept of parenting programs and the evidence base supporting their efficacy. I'm then going to go on to describe active examples of how we're using these on the ground in low resource countries. And then I'm going to highlight the role of the school in providing reach to families. Next slide, please. There is growing evidence that positive parenting is at the foundation for healthy child development. Children who grow up in warm, supportive parenting environments are less likely to develop behavioral difficulties, even when they're faced with poverty and deprivation. Parenting interventions have been identified as effective interventions for promoting well-being and preventing difficulties, and they've been chosen by international agencies like the UNODC and the WHO as the intervention for choice to prevent child behavioral difficulties and the associated problems around these. Next slide, please. Now, the primary function of parenting is to facilitate the survival, development, and well-being of a child. It seems, simple enough. However, this kind of function may not always be carried out to full due to a number of individual or contextual factors that disrupt the mechanism by which positive parenting promotes children's ability to achieve their full potential. Parenting programs are interventions that are designed to enhance or change parental or caregiver role performance by training, support, or education. And their main goal simply is to influence the well-being of the children of these parents. Sometimes we call them family skills programs or parenting programs, but they're essentially different names for the same concepts. There have been several meta-analyses documenting the effectiveness of parenting programs across a real range of parental and child outcomes, such as drug and alcohol use, antisocial behavior, autism, developmental difficulties, and anxiety disorders, for example. Next slide, please. If you're going to address drugs and crime in any community or population, you really have to start very early on in their neighborhood with preventative strategies, and you need to get families on board. And we do this using strategies that are going to really help them bring up their children in the face of the sorts of pressures that they will face in their communities. Researchers have tested several different models to explain what different factors influence the possibility that an adolescent is going to start abusing substances. And in all of these models, parental and family factors have a central position in the long-term pathways leading to substance abuse. Whereas other factors like peer pressure influence, which we often think is actually quite important, is actually a contributing factor rather than the primary factor, which is the family in itself. Research indicates that the main factors in any family that put children and youth at risk of substance abuse are really the same factors that place youth at risk for other problem behaviors. For example, so efforts to prevent substance abuse will also have benefits to other risky behaviors. This really explains why parenting programs may or may not address specifically substance abuse when targeting families. So often we carry out these parenting programs with the aim of reducing substance abuse in the future without actually addressing them via the programs. Next slide, please. If we now focus on low-resource countries, now these countries are countries with a different level of compounding challenges. Most parenting interventions have been developed, evaluated, and implemented in Western English-speaking high-income countries. But meta-analytic reviews have indicated that evidence-based parenting programs implemented in other countries can be just as successful from the country that they were actually originated in too, with only real minimal adaptations being necessary. Of course, there are a number of low-risk cultural and contextual adaptations that we can do to increase the engagement and improve cultural appropriateness. And this is the work that I've been heavily involved in with the UNODC and the University of Manchester as we continue to develop and evaluate programs for different low-resource countries. So if we look first of all at cultural adaptations, parenting interventions have been tested in different countries and cultures. Some of them have been adapted following really rigorous and systematic procedures to improve the fit for the target population. Of course, if you're not familiar with the target group, it's so important to engage with them before you can actually present them with an intervention. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'm going to give a few examples of how we have done this. So firstly, we're really highly involved in the development and the implementation of parent programs for refugee families. Specifically, we've worked with Syrian refugee families. And we've been developing a number of numerous parenting resources and tools, and we've conducted evaluations on these. But the first steps in our original work with Syrian refugees was to engage with them, and I interviewed them in refugee camps and other refugee contexts, and I asked them how they were coping, what challenges they were facing in raising their children, and how they felt they could be supported. So thus, all our further steps when we went on to develop these different resources was based on the essential needs that the families presented us with. I'll give another example. Next slide, please. Another example of cultural adaptation and sensitivity is clear in the recent development of the UNODC multi-session family skills program called Strong Families. This was designed specifically for low-resource countries. We hope to begin a trial of this program in Afghanistan in the upcoming weeks. In our initial steps in the development of this program, we held meetings with Afghan experts working in different contexts with Afghan families, and we asked them how culturally and contextually relevant they felt that Strong Families program would be for Afghan families. And we took on board their feedback, and we've incorporated this in the final version that we have that we were going to trial with families. Also, throughout the evaluation process of the upcoming trial, we're going to ask families and facilitators their opinions too on the program and on the context to ensure that the end final product is a program that is sensitive and relevant to parents so that they can engage completely. Next slide, please. Another issue in low-resource countries is literacy levels. In many low-income countries, this ranges from 30 to 80%. But this shouldn't be a barrier to successful parenting programs. There are still ways you can successfully engage families, even if the parents or the primary caregivers are illiterate or have poor reading and writing skills. Myself and colleagues at the University of Manchester, Professor Rachel Calum and Dr. Kim Cartwright, have developed an intervention that consists of a parenting booklet and an associated discussion group for groups of caregivers living in low-resource countries. So families receive a booklet with simple parenting information that demonstrates key parenting skills, and they also take part in a 2-hour discussion group which elaborates the ideas in this booklet. And the two are used together. So in March, I was in the West Bank, Palestine with the UNODC, and I trained facilitators to run a research study to explore the effectiveness of this intervention with caregivers in Palestine. Now, considering the low literacy levels in that part of the world, it was important that every stage of the program, we kept the written materials as simple as possible, and that we used drawings to illustrate the concepts and the actions, so that if parents were to flick through the booklet, even if they couldn't read the program or the materials, they could be reminded by the drawings of the different concepts that they previously engaged in discussions about. So, for example, in this one here, we portray the benefits of developing and implementing family rules in the home. You know, we see children arguing, they remember or reflect on a rule that the caregiver presented them with earlier, and they redirect their actions. So simple drawings that kind of explain to families, even without them having to read, the concepts that are important that were discussed. If we can go to the next slide, please. In this, for example, we have a father on the left being in tune with their child, noticing that they're upset and going and comforting them and showing them sensitivity. Then on the right, we have an image that demonstrates the idea of having a reward system in the home to encourage children and good behavior. So we ran this discussion group in Palestine. I ran it initially with 23 families, and they were really highly engaged, even with really low literacy levels. To date, we have 120 families that have taken part, and we hope soon to start collecting follow-up data and to be able to present this soon. Next slide, please. So over the past years, I've been involved in a various kind of number of parenting program implementation in a number of low-resource countries. And the number one location that my team and I find is crucial in the engagement for and the success of a program in the local community is the schools. Research with programs implemented within schools has shown to really positively impact parents' involvement in school life and are instrumental in a number of ways. Firstly, for example, in the recruitment of families to the program. And this could be recruitment to a universal program for all families of children, or it could be for families that have specifically identified with a certain kind of problem. School is seen as a neutral location, away from any political or governmental group. And problems such as attending groups due to lack of transport or unfamiliarity of routes can really be erased when you bring families and invite them to school. I'm going to give an example here. My colleagues and I have been working with the Children in War Foundation to enhance an existing program called Teaching Recovery Techniques, which is used in multiple humanitarian contexts in many low-resource countries. And we've added a new stream to this program to include family support and parenting skills. So parents are supporting their children in their recovery of trauma and also developing parenting skills. Now, the first time we piloted this program with Syrian refugees, we took advice from local NGOs and governmental bodies who were working around the border, and they all advised us that the best location to run these programs would be in refugee schools. So we did that. We took on board the local information based on the fact that with their knowledge, they knew that this was going to be the most likely place for families to come to. And the outcomes were very promising. We were able to run a small pilot study, families engaged, and we had some really positive results that I'll put a link up if anyone would like some more information. I mean, schools are ideal locations as you're transferring a new skill set to the staff there too. It's common in low-resource countries and settings that teachers themselves who are part of the education system of that school are trained to become facilitators of parenting programs as well. And we've used this model too. Next slide, please. I just mentioned that we ran a pilot of this TRT plus parenting program in Turkey. We've since set up a much larger trial and in Lebanon, and we're collecting follow-up data now. And again, on the advice of NGOs and governmental bodies who were supporting this really huge number of refugees in Lebanon, we were encouraged to use schools as our focal point, and this has been highly successful. For example, we were able to distribute screening forms to 500 school children in just 2 days. We identified through this that 60% were experiencing post-trauma distress and would be able to benefit from the program that we were offering for themselves and their caregivers. Another really noteworthy point here is that we trained and using a new model of teletraining for the school. So I trained the 16 program facilitators who ran the study on this family program, who were actually school teachers while they were in their school working after hours and while I was based in my office in Manchester. And this model really opens up so many possibilities to reaching low resource areas or unstable areas with training and resources that are often inaccessible in conflict and refugee contexts, and doing this via schools, which are often, really large gathering focal points. This can be really powerful. Next slide, please. Thirdly, schools are often linked to local governments who will have statistics or information on how much of the local population is attending school and how many families aren't in school. This will really give an indicator of how focal and focused we should be on schools and how much we should start to outreach as well. And finally, for trial evaluation purposes of parent programs or family skills program, something that we really do need more of in low-resource countries, recruiting families to programs via schools can be really valuable in aiding the return of follow-up data too, as we assume that children registered in a school allows the assumption that their families will remain in that area for a significant amount of time to kind of have that kind of standard 3-month or 6-month follow-up data that you want for an evidence base of a good program. Last slide, please. So finally, the factors that place a young person at risk, or on the other hand, kind of serve to protect them from substance abuse in low-resource countries, are largely the same as those linked to several other kind of problematic behaviors like violence, criminal activity, or risky sexual behavior. parenting programs are increasingly perceived as a cost-effective means of preventing and treating such problems in children and adolescents. Their effectiveness is supported by a really large, growing body of empirical research. But the availability of parenting programs at a universal level supports a really well-coordinated, comprehensive approach that will empower children and young people to harness the protective factors and address and tackle the risk factors. Thank you.
Thank you, Aala. And Hanna, can you take us into your presentation, please?
Yes. So thank you also for giving me this opportunity to present some concluding thoughts around the work we have been doing here when it comes to working in low resource settings. Next slide, please. So as Wadih already indicated, we mainly focus in low and middle income countries in our work, and it's of course a great interest also to many of our stakeholders to find good guidance on how to work in these places, because unfortunately most of the scientific evidence on what is effective for prevention comes from high income settings. And of course, in our day-to-day work, we are constantly generating that evidence, but still there was a feel that even more is needed. So during 2016, we set up an expert group of different researchers and policymakers and practitioners working in prevention in low resource settings, as well as those working on treatment, to provide and generate some general guidance in working in low resource and isolated settings. So that is why it's called rural settings. And of course, like Aala already mentioned, different mobile possibilities are big emerging field, and research is accumulating all the time from there. So Aala was mentioning a good example on how she is using it for capacity building, and we have many similar good examples from around the world. And then also the research on using different online or telephone technologies for actual skills building, for example, building parenting skills or life skills. We have some good examples, and some research is also emerging from that, how to do it via online programs or just via telephone. And of course, for all low income settings and low resource settings, these do not work. There are many places where you wouldn't even have telephone lines, but then again, there are many settings that appear to be very low resource settings, but where they would, for example, have mobile phones. And so there is a lot that can be done there. Then, of course, in many these kind of isolated low resource settings that are often rural, there can be quite distinct cultural features, which further highlights the need for cultural adaptation, which of course is something we at UNODC is anyway. We are always doing an adaptation before we bring an evidence-based program to a new place. But this is something that was even more highlighted in the discussions around how to best work in this kind of rural settings. Also, thinking that this kind of adaptation boosts local ownership and in that sense also sustainability over time, which is very important if we think about how to best use resources in situations where we really don't have too much resources to start off with. And then finally, of course, building as much as possible on any existing capacities or infrastructures is key in situations where you cannot assume that you have so much capacities or infrastructures. Then you need to be flexible and capable on building on whatever resources and or infrastructures you have in that place. And this is what we had in mind when we then, for the prevention part, ended up focusing really on community-based delivery systems for prevention programs. Next slide, please. And we published this March this guide on prevention on drug use and treatment in rural settings. Next slide, please. And it's available at our webpage. And as I said, for prevention, we spend most of the time there in this guide in describing different community-based delivery systems as one vehicle in really mobilizing all the existing resources and on building sustainability in these settings. And when we speak about community-based delivery systems, we mean these different existing, tested and evaluated models via which communities are mobilized to plan and deliver and evaluate prevention programs. And we have good evidence showing that this kind of community-based models can be effective in preventing drug, alcohol and tobacco use. Next slide, please. And there are different models available. Unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but it is the fact that most of them derive from Northern America, but they have been successfully utilized in different parts of the world. And there are few different models available, but all of them consist of these same steps of mobilizing the community together to first assess what are the needs and resources in the community, build some community readiness, and mobilize the community stakeholders to plan and deliver prevention, and then in the end evaluate and feed these evaluation results back to planning the continuation of the prevention programs. Next slide, please. And most of these programs offer manualized evidence-based prevention programs, normally school-based programs, building life skills and also addressing normative beliefs around substance use, as well as a family skills program. And so this is the arrow on the bottom, because it's a key component of those community-based models that really has yielded good level evidence. But in addition, many of these community-based delivery models also include some components that aim to improve community and the existing protective factors in general, such as improving the physical environment or organizing structured leisure time activities, or building and strengthening community norms and so on. And these elements are not necessarily evidence-based, but they might be a supportive factor in also sustaining the actual prevention components, and also they might also contribute positively to prevention. And then also many of these programs, in addition, have some awareness-raising components that also then support the mobilization. I'm showing this distinction because there are also some community mobilization models that do not really have scientific evidence showing that there is real impact on substance use, but they have more evidence on showing how some other more immediate factors are improved and how these programs are well received and appreciated. But to really see that the character that is really common for those programs that show good impact on substance use is that they actually deliver also manualized prevention programs. Next slide, please. And well, this is one example, Prosper, that is different from the other models in the way it very heavily involves universities and academic stakeholders and partners them with the different community stakeholders. Next slide, please. And the other one is communities that care, that has been also implemented very widely in different places. And for example, our partners have been in an organization called Nuevos Rumbos, have been implementing it in Colombia, and they have been getting very positive results on substance use with this approach. Next slide, please. So Wadih already showed you this menu of evidence-based approaches that UNODC supports, and community-based delivery initiatives is one such evidence-based approach. But moreover, all of these other boxes are or elements of this menu are positive components that could be supported and planned and delivered and especially sustained via this kind of community engagement models. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to also use this opportunity, since you were kind enough to allow me to speak, that we are at this moment updating our prevention standards. And when we did it first time around, less than 5% of the evidence we were able to include in the systematic review to the evidence base on which we built these standards was coming from low and middle income countries. And so this is a big question for us, but that is why at this point we are really trying to reach out to all possible stakeholders and also telling them, if you have any good guidance and good quality scientific evidence coming from low resource settings, please share with us now, because we are right now updating the standards, and I think it would be a really great thing for the entire prevention field if we would be able to give even more guidance on how to do prevention in low resource settings in the updated version that we hope that we will be able to draft early next year. So thank you so much for this opportunity to present this to you.
Thank you, Hanna. Alicia, could you display the first slide and the two I have, and then we're going to move to discussion. We're not going to have time to go through some of the points, and we're not going to have too much time for a discussion, but I'm going to suggest that we be flexible a little bit with 5 or 10 minutes more to extend this session a bit and provide opportunity for people to ask questions and to comment. I'm working with a bit of a problem because I can't see the list of comments that were made. I've just seen them as they were made during the presentation. So I'm going to ask Alicia or Mohini to, if you have them displayed on your computer, to read out. There was a comment from Brian Flay and a question from Sky Siu, who during the presentations, if you could come back to those and highlight those for the group. And if I could ask our panel members, and first of all, thank you to our panel for 3 excellent presentations. And I think they illustrate, if you look through the points in this slide, a couple of the points there that were part of the findings of our review. But if you could turn to Alicia or Mohini and just read out or summarize the points that were made by Brian and Sky.
I'm not sure if Mohini has access to the conversation piece, but one of the questions here from Brian says, some EB school-based prevention programs are now offered with a one-time license that allows them to be adapted for the culture. Have such programs been considered? This seems like a better approach than development of new programs in each country. And I can go down to Sky's question. Sky says, thank you for the presentation. This is Sky from Kelly Support Group. Question for Wadih. As there are different subcultures and types of schools from your school recruitment process, have you observed which schools had more success, and what are some of the factors that help with this? Also, have the programs been included as part of the mandatory curriculum, such as life education, or more as extracurricular / after-school programs? How's that for now, Doug?
Okay, thank you. Wadih or Hanna, would you like to respond to Brian's point about one of those challenges of getting past copyrights and all those ownership issues?
I'm still available if I can, and maybe Hanna, if she wants to add, I'll be more than happy she intervenes more. Sure, maybe I need to explain myself. I was not clear in the discussion. Of course, we would like to maintain totality of programs that are evidence-based. We're not really promoting like programs that are country-specific, many programs that are country-specific. But we need to overcome the challenge of always the developers of programs have, the vested interest, which is right in many of the instances, to maintain the identity of the program, the brand that is, which sometimes make it harder for the countries that are implementing to bypass this and to move away from them. There is some level of flexibility with evidence-based programs. We're working on this. in the level of lab skills education, where there are, as I said, many programs that are in the top. At least one of them is clearly we're using Unplugged from the European Union that is in the public domain and has lots of level of flexibility. And we are exploring this, but it's that leverage of allowing the countries to move away from this program and get a better identity of it. That's a challenge. The other question on from Sue regarding the differences in the programs, just to start from the bottom end of it, life skills education programs are offered within the school curriculum during classroom hours by the teachers as far as the programs that we're implementing are concerned. They're interactive, and that was one of the challenges of putting them in because of they're added to the current curriculum. We are trying other life skills education programs outside the school curriculum. Actually, we are even introducing one developed by UNODC that is implemented through the sports settings by the coaches, and we're trying to see these opportunity in different settings put through. With any program that is universal, there's always subgroups that benefit from the program differently than others. The question seems to be not only on lab skills, if I get Sue's question correct. So for example, classroom management programs that we've been promoting. More evidence that from a gender perspective are more effective on boys than girls. So yes, I mean, all of these factors within a universal program, there's always subcultures and subgroups that benefit from the program differently. In our piloting, however, we do not have the luxury of testing these difference in subcultures and subgroups because of the fact that we rely on the evidence that existed before. But we are trying our best to see with the limited information that we have to see if this replicates in other countries.
Thank you, Wahid. There was another comment, Alicia, again, I'm struggling because I can't see the list, but Murtaza Mahid I had a comment or a question as well. Can you just read that out, and then we'll try to move to some sort of invitation to have a continuing discussion.
Should I read the question myself?
Oh, good. Yes, thank you.
Hi. So this is Murtaza from Youthrise, and we are exactly working recently in Afghanistan with a model of peer education with the school kids. And our prevention model is based on harm reduction. So my question is regarding all the projects which is running right now around the world in UNODC. So how are we dealing with kids who are using drugs actively in schools? And do we consider harm reduction as a prevention model, or we don't consider it in schools?
May I? Murtaza?
Yes, please.
When it comes to at the level of prevention, for us, most of the work that we're relying on when we say prevention is prevention of initiation of substance use. And the limit that we reach when it comes to the borderline with the medical model of the response is at the level of indicated prevention. And in terms of the prevention standards, the programs that we have in place are brief intervention. This fits within the model of what the philosophy of the prevention that we're operating under. So basically, the process of harm reduction in terms of UNODC's program of work more fits within the treatment model of the response and less in the prevention of drug use from its spectrum.
Excellent, thank you. Alicia, could you display my second slide then? Just to sort of start to wrap up, and thank you for everyone for your participation and for the three presentations today. We're engaged in a conversation being sponsored by Plan International, UK. It's a project to try to look at different issues within the low resource country context, and we're pleased to be able to offer the chance to have a continuing conversation. As part of that project, which is leading off with this webinar, we've had a chance to pull together the research and resources and reports related to substance abuse in low resource countries. And we've drafted some statements which are noted in that link on this screen. We'll obviously send out an invitation with a continuing conversation. But we're having a really good response we wrote to most of the authors of the material that we found. We found over 125 research articles and almost 100 reports and resources, and we're inviting them to comment on a series of draft statements. These points here are not the statements, they're sort of discussion points combining several of the statements. And we're going to do that through an online consultation and come back to a second webinar which would be more participatory and allow for people to make mini presentations and then allow for discussion by the group. And so these are some of the points. And if you look to this previous slide into this one, I think we're starting to see there's a lot of echoes in the work that's being reported here by Wadih and by Hanna and by Aala in terms of some of the issues that are more relevant to low resource countries, but they're also relevant to all countries, basically. And one of the interesting pieces was the really trying to engage in an active knowledge exchange about low resource countries. There was a lot of reports we found. They're older reports, but the Global Student Health Survey and the Global Youth Tobacco Survey data, there were analyses and so on. And so there's lots of knowledge out there that we can focus on and try to come to some conclusion about some key points, and then we'll try to prepare some sort of summary or maybe even a series of summaries. And Hanna, I was very pleased to note that the renewal of the prevention guidelines will be an opportunity to maybe link that into the discussions that you're having. So really pleased to hear that. So I'm going to allow for one final chance. If everybody wanted to make a comment. Young Feng, I see that you're online as well. You were. I'm not sure if you're still there, but anybody else who would like to just press the little microphone button and have a brief comment or a question before we close today.
Can I just add just one question regarding the UNODC International Standard for Drug Prevention? Can we include the model we are applying in Afghanistan recently in the model?
Yeah. So I mean, regarding the model, is the question coming from YouthRise, right?
Yes.
Yeah. When it comes to the filtering the programs to get inside the prevention standard, is just based on the research that's available on every program. We don't flag a specific program, but more families of program with clinical trials supporting its research. So whatever research you have regarding this program, whatever is available, please feel free to share it with us. And as long as it supports the modality and first of implementation, as well as the research criteria that goes into the standards, any program is welcome. So Hanna just shared with you her email address before leaving, and I will share mine on chat. But whatever you have research regarding the program, please feel free to share it with us. And I'm typing the email here.
Great, thank you. So we'll follow up on that. Any other comments or questions before we close?
This is Yung from UNESCO. So don't have anything to add at this moment, but just express my appreciation for the presenters and organizers for this session. And just want to say we will continue to be involved in this process. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Young Fin. Okay, thank you everybody for participating. Watch for the note. Mohini, yes, we can't forget the advertising. And I wanted to thank both Mohini and Alicia from Save the Children for their ongoing support for this series of webinars. It's been an excellent process and, again, an excellent session. Mohini?
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, speakers. It was a very interesting presentation today and discussion over substance abuse prevention for children, for youth, and the different approaches that have shown to be effective. We will be sharing the recording of today's webinar along with the resources and the presentations that you've made on the Fresh Schools and Health webinar page. We'll also be sending out an email to the schools and health mailing list. So do look out for those, and please do also share with your networks. And we look forward to next month's webinar, which will be in July on the 17th, commemorating World Youth Skills Day. We look forward to you joining us. It'll be at 9 a.m. Eastern Time and on the same webinar link. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Mohini, and thanks to everybody. I look forward to the next session. Bye for now.